Hello, guys. I'm Taib, and I'm here with my pastor, Reverend Julio Orozco. And the reason why we're here tonight is because on Sunday he talked about the resurrection. And as a believer, we are now in a day and age where kids are asking a lot of questions about the resurrection of Christ and the virgin birth, and whether this is true or not, and why it violates natural laws. But what you talked about on Sunday was really important, and I felt like it's important for our audience or whoever's watching this to really hear what you have to say. So I'm gonna ask you to kind of break down what you talked about on Sunday morning. I think it was important, and you can give our audience the reasons why you think this is the truth, and why you believe it, and why it is so factual. So it's to you now.
Yeah, thank you so much for carving out this time to talk about something that's just so seminal to our faith. And what we were talking about on Sunday, it was Resurrection Sunday. I was sharing a little bit about having grown up in church. I heard the resurrection story, and I think in my mind as a child and maybe even a young adolescent, I don't know if you ever watched Scooby Doo
Yes.
cartoons. When we talk about the resurrection, in my mind, I would try to picture what that might be like or look like. And so in my mind, it was kind of this phantasmagoric kind of situation. And I think maybe what I was referring to was like a spiritual resurrection, like a spirit, almost like a ghost like kind of thing. And something that became really pivotal for me was trying to wrap my head around the truth that Christ's resurrection was a physical, bodily resurrection. Um, and so that's the piece that I kind of camped on a little bit on Sunday. And there's quite a couple of pieces that went into that. One of the things was that if Christ was a charlatan, like if he was just a good talker and he wanted to keep his reputation alive, but he knew that he wasn't going to resurrect, it would have been easy for him to say, my resurrection will be spiritual, because then there's no way to confirm it. Like, how do you defy that? How do you test that? I mean, it's just, so he could have went that route. But his claim was that his resurrection would be a bodily, physical resurrection after 3 days. So he stacked against himself something that's impossible without the power of God. And so that's one of the things. If he was a charlatan, he would not have set himself up to fail. And so his claim was one that it necessitated a bodily resurrection. The next thing that I think goes into that is once the resurrected Christ appears to his disciples, first to the women and his disciples, he encounters Thomas. They also called him Didymus, and he was kind of he wasn't sure about the whole situation, and that's where we get that phrase, the doubting Thomas. That's the guy that they're talking about. And Christ comes to him and he says, "Go ahead, touch my wounds." If this was a vision, if this was a psychological, like visual hallucination, um, that would not have been possible. But Christ tells Thomas, "Touch my wounds. Go ahead and put your fingers in these wounds." And not only that, he meets up with his disciples and asks them to have breakfast. He meets them on the beach after they had been fishing, and they eat. Like if this was a spiritual kind of thing, there was no need for food for a spirit, physical food. So the Christ, the risen Christ, experienced hunger, and he still had the wounds to show it, which tells us that this was a physical, bodily resurrection. And here's where I think our culture in the West, it's tough to think in a both and kind of way. We tend to think either or. So it's either physical or spiritual. But also in this same time frame, Christ shows up to where the disciples were, and he goes in through a locked door. And so his body, although it was physical, it was still apt for heaven. It was glorified. So it was able to go through locked doors and such, but still had the wounds to show the physical part of it. And that's not that theme of both and these two seemingly juxtaposed things, that's not rare for Christ. Like he is God and man. He's the lion and the lamb. He embodies a lot of seemingly opposite ends of a spectrum. And so this isn't a surprise that his resurrection is both bodily, but there's something in that body, and it's spiritually as well, that allows him to go through matter, but also still be very much a physical presence. And on top of that, what's really kind of continues to bolster this claim in my heart is the fact that he appeared to plenty of people. It wasn't just the women, it wasn't just the disciples. There's the list of folks. And Paul writes in one of his letters to the Corinthians that he appeared more to, I believe the number was like 500. He appeared to more than 500. How do you fabricate a visual hallucination for 500 people? And it wasn't all at once. It wasn't this mass event. It was in different combinations of people at different time over a span of over a month. Um, the way that the canonical books get were accepted into the Bible, the canon, is that they had to meet certain burdens of veracity, so that
Mm-hmm.
the believing community would take these books as authoritative in how they live their lives. That's what we call the only rule and practice for a Christian. Now, there were books that were spoken against, and those the word for those is anti-legumena. But there were books that were spoken for, that were affirmed by the people, and those were called homolegumena. And the interesting thing there is that you had over 500 folks over a period of over a month seeing the resurrected Christ. And one of the elements for canon was that the book had to be written within one generation of Christ. The reason is, nowadays, when we don't know something, we can hop on Google and fact check, right? But back then, they didn't have that. And so, in
Mm-hmm.
order for the book to be authoritative, it had to be written within one generation of Christ. Um, the reason is so that if any claims made in that book were false or incorrect, there would be enough living people to say, nope, I was there and it was not like that. And so again, you see the Christ stack against himself the odds. He's claiming that 500, maybe 500 plus people has seen him, and
Mm-hmm.
any person that happened to be there in any of those instances, it could take just one person to say, no, I was there, and this person is lying. There was no
Mm-hmm.
physical Christ there. This person's nuts, or they were talking to air, right? If it was just a spiritual thing or a hallucination. But no, over 500 people saw him, and the books, this particular book that I'm talking about in Corinthians, it made it in to the canon, which means that it met the burden of canon, which is this book is transformative in people's lives. This book was written by a disciple or a disciple of a disciple, but not three times removed, and it was written within a generation of Christ. Now there are other burdens of standard, but that's enough, I think, just to share a little bit of why I believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ, and why I don't think it's crazy, and why I don't think that it is the veracity of it is wild. And I would say that a very important piece that has really bolstered this faith in me is a talk given by Vince Vitale, who he works with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Um, he actually interviewed two professors from Princeton uh, and in their philosophy department, and he And these are folks that are knowledgeable in philosophy and theology. The fact that Christ was risen from the dead in academia, in high scholastics, in the Ivy League, that is not a point of contention. That
Mm.
that is conceded. That has to be conceded. These two folks, and I can send you the link to that video if it's helpful,
Sure.
if anybody would want to see that. But talking to two scholastics in this area of theology, philosophy, New Testament, non-believers, non-believers, they had no explanation for that. The fact that
Mm.
even the day of worship was changed, that the first day of the week, these very pivotal pieces took place, could not have been without physical, visible evidence. The fact that the apostles would go on to die crazy deaths over a lie. You look at Watergate; those folks weren't even able to keep alive for a month. So those are some pieces, and so yeah, thank you for giving me a chance to kind of just speak my heart on that.
Oh, good. And also, one of the pieces is all this stuff was prophesied, so it was backed up by prophecies. And then when you look at the Old Testament, there were instances after instances where the resurrection was kind of shadowed. There was passages that were showing it before it actually happened. When you looked at Elijah raising that widow's son that died,
Mm,
he stretched over the child, and I think he did it 3 times. I don't want to say something wrong here. And then Elisha did the same thing. So I think that in itself also verifies the authenticity of the resurrection, and the
mm,
fact that what you said earlier, just now, that these guys were willing to die for what they believed, and it's something that they saw with their own eyes. And that's the critical thing that sometimes I don't think people actually think about, because you can talk about people dying for their faith, but these guys died for something that they saw with their natural senses, their eyes. They saw it happen. See, a lot of like guys of other religion, they have a theoretical thought. They have a thought that they think, okay, if I die, I'm gonna be given all these virgins and all this stuff, and it's all in their head. The disciples died for something they saw with their own eyes. To me, that sealed it.
hmm
But
hmm
I just love what you said here. So I'm appreciative of everything that you said tonight.
Yeah, thank
So.
you. I mean, the part that you were saying about the prophets, I mean, just Christ being born, and the exactitude of prophecies that fulfilled over 350 prophecies.
Mm.
The Isaiah 53 passage written 700 years before Christ. I mean, these are things that mathematically, probability wise, it's just it, it it's it's too exact.
It's
It's too
exact.
exact. And then to the piece that you were saying, with other faiths that might say, well, in my mind, or not this physical revelation. um I think that God has given us, there's this word called solipsistic. So
Mm-hmm.
solipsistic argument, it comes from a philosophy that says, in solipsism, basically, how can I know that any other mind and any other consciousness exists outside of my own?
Mm.
Right? So I'm aware of my thoughts, but how do I know that outside of my mind, all the other people that I know, that their thoughts and their consciousness are real? How do I know
Mm.
that's not my own mind uh, making that up, a figment of my messed up mind or whatever? Um, and the truth is that we need outside
Sources.
verifiable sources and measures that give us the context. And in the field of counseling, that's called grounding. You
Mm.
have to have these outside external things that are physical, that are measurable, so that you can know that you are grounded. And so when someone's having an irrational thought or
Mm.
fear or anxiety, you get grounded by measuring your not your feelings, your internal self, but by what's external. And so with scripture, there are tons of historical documents written by people that are not believers. They don't have a dog in this fight. They don't have a horse in this race. You look at like Josephus, for example, is a big one. But there are plenty other historical documents, political documents, that frame this narrative of the Christian faith in context, in a geopolitical and a physical context, in a geographical context, and it's verifiable. So it's undeniable that Christ was born. It's undeniable the miracles that he performed. It's undeniable that he was killed on a cross, and it's
Mm,
undeniable that his resurrection was physical. And that is not only taking facts from the Bible, but looking at external resources that
resources.
help to bolster that claim for folks that don't necessarily hold the same worldview as we do.
Exactly. I appreciate your input on this. That was it was good. So I think we'll end here because we don't want to hold them too long,
Okay.
uh, watching us and stuff. But I really appreciate it. So we're gonna stop the broadcast now and look forward to the next one.
Sounds good. Yeah, and if this needs to be broken into smaller chunks, that's fine as well. Let me know. But I really enjoyed participating. So thank you for having this awesome idea. Thank you.
Thank you.